The dust never settled in Missoula. It hung in the September air like a living thing coating throats and lungs and the backs of promises. The livestock auction yard sprawled at the edge of town, where respectability gave way to necessity, where men came to buy what they needed and sell what they could no longer afford to keep. Garrett Stone stood at the back fence, hat pulled low, watching the proceedings with the careful attention of a man who had learned to trust nothing and no one. He had not been to town in 4 years. The mountain had been his only companion, his only confessor, his only judge. But winter was coming, and the mountain did not care about a man's desire for solitude when his pack horses lay dead in a ravine, victims of spring flooding that had come 3 months too late. He needed horses, 2, maybe 3 if the price was right, draft animals that could carry supplies through snow and ice, that could survive on sparse feed and hard conditions. The kind of horses that, like him, had learned that survival was not about comfort, but about endurance. The auctioneer's voice cracked across the yard like a whip. A heavy man with a face that spoke of too many whiskeys and too few principles, he gestured toward the ring where 2 draft horses circled their coats, dull their ribs showing, but their legs clean, and their eyes clear. "Gentlemen, gentlemen!" The auctioneer called, his voice carrying the practiced enthusiasm of a man selling salvation to the damned. "2 fine draft horses, sound enough if you ain't particular. Strong backs, willing spirits. Who'll start the bidding at $20? Garrett studied the horses. They were underfed but not broken. There was still strength in their shoulders, still pride in the way they held their heads. They would do. They would survive. Like everything else that mattered, they simply needed a chance. The bidding crawled forward. $18. 19. Men shifted in the dust, calculating costs against necessity, weighing feed prices against winter's certainty. Garrett raised his hand. $22, more than he wanted to spend, less than he was willing to lose. 22 to the gentleman in the back, the auctioneer announced. Do I hear 23? Silence. The kind that comes when men have reached the limit of their resources and their need. Going once, the auctioneer said, his eyes scanning the crowd. Going twice. Then he grinned. It was an ugly expression, the kind that preceded cruelty the way thunder preceded lightning. "And hell," the auctioneer said, turning to gesture toward the far side of the ring, "take the woman too. Comes with the lot. Free of charge." Garrett's attention shifted. She stood behind the horses, half hidden in their shadows. A woman, late 20s perhaps, though hardship had a way of aging people beyond their years. Her wrists were bound with rope so old it had darkened to the color of dried blood. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, stained with dirt and sweat, hanging from her frame like something borrowed from a scarecrow. Her feet were bare, pale against the dark earth. Her hair fell tangled across her face, obscuring everything but her mouth pressed into a tight, bloodless line. She did not move, did not flinch. Stood perfectly still like a person who had learned that stillness was the only armor left. "What the hell is this?" someone called from the front. The auctioneer shrugged a gesture of casual dismissal. "Came in with the stock from a freight company. Can't sell her separate. No papers, no name, no use. She don't talk, don't work. Tried putting her in a kitchen, she just stood there, worthless near as anyone can tell." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Rough, careless. The sound of men who had forgotten what shame felt like, or perhaps had never known it at all. A man near the rail whistled long and low. Another clapped. And beneath all of it a smaller sound, rope dragging across packed earth as the woman shifted her weight just barely, just enough to suggest she was still human beneath the layers of degradation. Garrett felt something cold settle in his chest. He had seen this before. Not here, not exactly like this, but close enough. Close enough to remember. Close enough to taste the regret that had lived in his mouth for 30 years. He was 10 years old again, standing in a mining camp in the Rockies, watching Chinese laborers auction off a woman whose husband had died in a cave collapse. She had stood just like this, bound, silent, waiting for men to decide her fate like she was livestock, like she was property, like she was less than human. No one had spoken up, not the foreman, not the priest, not the men who worked beside her husband. They had let it happen because it was easier to look away than to risk comfort for conscience. Garrett had been a child then. He had an excuse for his silence. He had no excuse now. "That's far enough, Kane. I mean, that ain't right," a voice called out. Garrett recognized the speaker, Holt Brennan, a rancher from the South Valley, good man by most accounts. But he did not move from his position against the fence. The auctioneer laughed. "Life ain't right, friend, but business is business. You want the horses or not?" Garrett opened his mouth to respond, but another voice cut through the noise. "I'll give you 25 for the horses." The speaker stepped forward. Virgil Crane. Garrett knew him by reputation. A man with a big gut hanging over his belt eyes that lingered too long on things that did not belong to him, and a history of women who stopped appearing at social gatherings after being seen in his company. "And I'll give you $5 extra for the woman," Crane continued, his smile widening. "I got use for something that don't talk back." The laughter grew louder, more vicious. Men slapped their thighs, elbowed their neighbors, grinned with the casual cruelty of people who had mistaken power for virtue. Garrett watched the woman, her fingers curled into fists at her sides. It was the only movement she made. Small, tight, controlled. The kind of thing most men would not notice. Garrett noticed. He noticed because it was not the gesture of someone broken. It was the gesture of someone choosing when to break, and it was not now, not yet, not while there was still something worth preserving beneath the surface. $30, Garrett said. The yard went quiet. Crane turned, his smile faltering. "What, $30 for the lot?" Garrett repeated, his voice calm, flat, carrying no more emotion than if he were ordering coffee. "Cut her loose." The auctioneer blinked. "Now hold on. I said cut her loose." Garrett did not raise his voice. He never needed to. There was something in the way he stood, in the set of his shoulders, in the absolute certainty of his stillness that made men reconsider their options. "You don't want her," Crane said, stepping closer. "Look at her. She's simple, probably diseased. You'd be doing yourself a favor walking away." "Then it's a favor I don't need," Garrett replied. Crane's face darkened. "You just made an enemy stone. Add it to the list." The auctioneer glanced between them, calculating something, profit perhaps, or the risk of violence in his yard, which was bad for business. Finally he waved a hand toward the woman. "Fine, cut her loose. $30 stone, cash." A boy stepped forward with a knife and sawed through the rope. It fell away in pieces, frayed and old, leaving red marks on the woman's wrists. Her hands dropped to her sides, and she swayed just once before catching herself against the nearest horse. Her fingers wrapped into its mane knuckles, white with the effort of remaining upright. Garrett counted out $30 in coins and bills, handed them to the auctioneer, and gathered the leads for the horses. He did not look at the woman, did not speak to her, simply turned toward the gate and walked, leading the horses behind him. He heard her footsteps in the dirt, bare feet on packed earth, following. They were a quarter-mile down the road before he stopped. The dust had thinned. The noise of the auction yard had faded to nothing. Garrett held the horses still and listened. Her breathing was steady, measured. Not the ragged panting of someone about to collapse, but the controlled rhythm of someone who had learned to conserve strength. He turned around. She stood 6 feet behind him, arms at her sides, head still lowered, waiting. "You don't have to follow me," Garrett said. "Nothing. I ain't your owner. I didn't buy you. You understand?" Silence. He studied her. Her hands, raw and scraped and torn at the nails, did not match the rest of her. They were fine-boned, precise. The kind of hands that belonged to someone who had held books, not plows. And her posture even beaten down as she was carried something straight and deliberate beneath the exhaustion. There was something else, too, something he had noticed at the auction. Her fingertips, faint blue stains barely visible beneath the dirt and grime. Ink stains, the mark of someone who wrote, who worked with documents, who was educated in a way that did not align with the story the auctioneer had told. "Can you talk?" he asked. She did not move. Garrett sighed. "All right. I got a cabin about 4 hours east. There's shelter, food, water. You can stay the night, rest. Tomorrow you can go wherever you want. That fair?" For the first time she lifted her head. Just enough. Her eyes met his through the tangle of dark hair, sharp, dark measuring, not broken, not empty, alert. Then she lowered her gaze again and took a step forward. Garrett turned back to the road. All right then. The walk was long and hot. September in Montana could not decide if it wanted to be summer or fall, and so it chose both baking the ground during the day and freezing it at night. The horses plodded along, tails flicking at flies. Garrett kept his pace steady and fought the urge to look back every 10 steps. She did not fall behind, not once. She matched the horses stride for stride, barefoot on cracked earth, and never made a sound. When they reached the cabin, the sun was lowering toward the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. It was a simple place. Squat house, weathered corral, a lean-to for supplies. The kind of structure a man built when he wanted function, not beauty. When he wanted to survive, not to impress. Garrett led the horses to water and pointed toward a small shed at the edge of the clearing. "There's a stove inside. Water in the barrel by the door. I'll bring food." She walked past him without pausing, stepped inside the shed and closed the door. Not a slam. Just a quiet, firm click, like a decision being made. Garrett stood in the yard for a long moment, hat in his hand, staring at the closed door. Then he went to the cabin and put together a plate of bread, cold beans, and dried venison. Simple food, the kind that kept a man alive without asking for gratitude. He carried it back and set it on the shed's doorstep. Knocked once. "Food's here." No answer. He went back to the cabin, sat at his table, and tried to eat. Could not. His mind kept circling back to the auction yard, the laughter, the rope, the way Crane had looked at her, the way she had clenched her fists, that one small furious gesture of someone refusing to be completely erased. A knock broke his thoughts. Garrett pushed back from the table and opened the door. She stood on the porch, the empty plate in her hands. She held it out to him. "Thank you," he said, taking it. She turned to go. "Wait." The word came out before he thought it through. She stopped her back to him. "If you need anything tonight, blankets, more water, just knock." She looked over her shoulder, that same measuring look, eyes that saw more than they revealed. Then she walked back to the shed and the door clicked shut again. Garrett washed the plate, slowly turning it over in his hands. She had eaten every scrap. He could tell by the way nothing clung to the surface. She had been hungry, truly hungry, the kind of hunger that came from weeks, maybe months of uncertainty. He woke before dawn out of habit. Ranching and mountain living did not care if a man slept well. It demanded presence, attention, the willingness to meet each day before it met you. He pulled on his boots, splashed water on his face, and stepped outside. The shed door was open. The woman was crouched beside the corral fence, her hands working a loose rail back into place. She had found a hammer somewhere, his probably from the toolbox in the lean-to. She was driving a nail with short, precise strikes, not the uncertain tapping of someone unfamiliar with tools, but the confident rhythm of someone who knew what she was doing. Garrett walked over slowly. She did not stop, did not look up, just finished the nail, tested the rail with both hands, and started on the next one. "That board's been loose since April," Garrett said. She drove another nail, tested it, moved on. "You don't have to do that." She paused then, set the hammer down carefully, and for the first time since the auction she spoke. Her voice was clear, steady, educated, the kind of speech that came from schoolrooms and parlors, not frontier kitchens. "The bottom hinge on your barn door is rusted through. It will break within the week." Garrett's chest seized. The words themselves were simple, observational, but the voice behind them carried weight, intelligence. the unmistakable mark of someone who had been taught to read, to write, to think. "You talk," he said. Immediately felt stupid for saying it. "Yes, they said you couldn't. They said a lot of things." She picked up the hammer again. Most of it was wrong. Garrett lowered himself to a crouch beside her, slow, keeping distance. "You let them believe it. At the auction. You stood there and let every man in that yard think you were—" He searched for the word. "Worthless," she finished. "A woman who can't speak, can't work, can't think. What use is she to men like that? None." "Exactly." She turned back to the fence. "And a woman with no use gets ignored, overlooked, forgotten. That is how I survived." Garrett sat there processing it, the silence at the auction, the stillness, the way she had let them laugh without flinching. It was not weakness. It was strategy, survival through invisibility. "What's your name?" he asked. She set the hammer down again, her fingers pressed flat against the rail. He watched something shift behind her eyes, a calculation, a decision. "Grace," she said. "Grace Dalton. Garrett Stone." He tipped his hat. "My cabin, such as it is." "I know. Your name is on the mailbox." A flicker of something crossed her face. Not quite a smile, but close. "It is a good cabin," she continued. "Needs work, but the bones are solid." Garrett huffed. "You an expert on cabins now?" "No, but I know land. I know what good soil looks like, and I know what happens when men steal it." The way she said it carried weight, old weight, personal weight. "Who stole your land, Grace?" She did not answer right away. She stood up, brushed dirt from her knees, and looked out across the property. Her jaw was set, her shoulders squared. "My family did not own land," she said carefully. "They took other people's. There is a difference." Garrett stood up too. "Took it how? Legally, which is the cruelest way." She turned to face him. Surveys redrawn, titles challenged, judges paid. By the time the real owners understood what was happening, they were already gone. "And you know this because—" She held his gaze without flinching. "My father is a man named Cornelius Dalton." The name hit Garrett like a fist. Dalton. He had seen that name on documents, in newspapers, on the foreclosure notice that had taken his father's ranch 8 years ago, Rocky Mountain Land Trust, the company that swallowed small homesteads the way rivers swallowed stones, slowly, completely, without apology. "Dalton," Garrett repeated. His voice had flattened to nothing. "Yes." "Cornelius Dalton is your father." "He was, until I became inconvenient." Grace held his gaze without flinching. "I found letters, contracts, proof of what he had done, not just the land grabs, but the bribes, the threats, the families he destroyed. I copied everything I could. And when he found out—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "He did not kill me. Killing a daughter raises questions, but having her declared mentally unsound and committed to an asylum that is just a father protecting his troubled child." Garrett's hands had balled into fists without him realizing it. He forced them open. "How long?" 6 months in the asylum. Then they transferred me to a charity program for mentally incompetent women, which was really just a way to sell me to a freight company heading west. I was passed from camp to camp, traded for supplies, labor, whatever they needed. Her voice stayed level, but her hands shook. Just once, just briefly, she pressed them flat against her thighs. The auction was supposed to be the last stop. They expected me to die there or end up with someone like that man. Virgil Crane. Either way, erased. "But you didn't." "No." She looked at him, really looked. "You said cut her loose, and I still do not know why." Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough. "Because I watched something like that happen once, when I was 10, a mining camp, a woman whose husband died. They auctioned her off like livestock, and I stood there and did nothing." He paused. "My mother found out. She sat me down and said, 'Garrett, there will come a day when you see wrong happening, and you will have a choice. Stay silent and safe, or speak up and risk everything. The kind of man you become depends on which choice you make.'" Grace was quiet for a long time. "Your mother," she said finally. "What happened to her? She held this ranch together after my father lost half of it. worked herself to bone. Died at 42 with calluses so thick she could not close her hands. He paused. Rocky Mountain Land Trust took the south pasture. That is what started the unraveling. Grace closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were bright, not with tears, with fury. Then I owe you more than safety, she said. I owe you the truth about what they did, and I can prove it. Prove it how? The documents I copied. I did not leave them behind. I hid them. Every name, every figure, every parcel number. 8 years of records. Garrett stared at her. Where? The journal is still hidden. In my mother's grave, Blackwood Cemetery outside Denver. 3 days' ride south. Garrett asked, and then what? Grace replied, we take it to Federal Land Office in Denver. With that journal, every land deal my father made in the last 8 years is invalidated. Thousands of acres returned, including your family's ranch. Garrett's reaction was pained. My family is dead. Land will not bring them back. No, but it will prove they did not fail. They were robbed. Your mother will not be remembered as the woman who could not keep a homestead. She will be remembered as a victim of fraud. Does she not deserve that? Garrett's throat tightened. Yes. My mother started the journal in 1866, Grace continued. She documented everything my father did. When she died in 1867, or when I thought she died, I was 12. But I found the journal hidden in her sewing room. I did not understand it then. She paused, remembering. When I was 16, I began working in my father's office. I started to understand what the numbers meant, what he was doing. So I continued my mother's work. I copied every transaction, every bribe, every forged document from 1871 to 1874. When I was 18, I knew I needed to hide the evidence somewhere my father would never look. You went back to her grave, Garrett said. Yes. I told my father I wanted to visit her on the anniversary of her death. I went alone. I brought tools. I opened the coffin. Her voice cracked. I thought I was saying goodbye one last time. Instead, I was hiding our shared evidence in the only place that seemed sacred, in the lining over where her heart would have been. Your mother is dead. Died when I was 12, or so my father said. Grace's voice hardened. But I am beginning to think everything my father ever told me was a lie. Before Garrett could respond, a sound cut through the morning air. A rifle being cocked. Close. Too close. They both turned. A man stood at the edge of the clearing, 35 maybe, Ute by the look of him. Dark hair and a braid, weathered skin eyes that had seen too much loss and refused to look away from it. He held a rifle with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had grown up with one in his hands. The rifle was aimed directly at Garrett. Garrett Stone, the man said. His voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that came before violence. I have been looking for you for 3 years. Garrett did not reach for his weapon, did not move, just stood there, hands visible, waiting. You have me at a disadvantage, Garrett said. You know my name. I don't know yours. Thomas Graywolf. The man's eyes were hard. You surveyed my family's land in 1872. Stone Valley, they called it then. Your survey said we did not have water rights to the creek that ran through our property. Based on that survey, Rocky Mountain Land Trust filed eviction papers. We contested. They sent men. There was a disagreement. Thomas's voice did not waver, but something flickered in his eyes. My parents died in a fire. My sister died that winter from exposure. She was 7 years old. Your survey killed my family. Garrett felt the ground shift beneath him. Stone Valley. 1872. He remembered that job. Clean boundaries, clear water sources. He had been careful, precise. He had done good work, or so he had thought. I did not know, Garrett said quietly. God help me, I did not know what they were doing with those surveys. Ignorance is not innocence. No, Garrett agreed. It is not. Grace stepped forward, carefully, keeping her movements slow and visible. Wait, she said. Garrett did not know what Dalton was doing. None of the surveyors did. My father altered the documents after they were submitted. Thomas's rifle did not waver. "How do you know?" "Because I filed them. I worked in my father's office from the time I was 16. I saw the original surveys. Garrett's survey for Stone Valley was accurate. It showed your family had full water rights. My father had his foreman change the boundary markers after the official filing, then backdated the alteration to match Garrett's submission date." She pulled herself straighter. "My name is Grace Dalton. Cornelius Dalton is my father. And I have proof of what he did. To your family, to Garrett's family, to 47 other families across this territory. I have it all written down, in a journal, hidden where he cannot reach it." Thomas looked at her for a long moment, then at Garrett, then back at Grace. "You are Dalton's daughter." "I was, until I found his ledgers, and he had me declared insane and sold to a freight company. I have been cargo for 8 months. Yesterday Garrett bought me at auction, for free, with 2 horses. Something shifted in Thomas's expression, not softening exactly, but a recalculation. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I can name every family my father destroyed, including yours. Thomas Gray Wolf, head of household. Wife Mary, age 37. Daughter Aida, age 7. Displaced August 1872 following disputed water survey. Family relocated to reservation land. Mary Gray Wolf died September 1872, pneumonia. Aida Gray Wolf died December 1872, malnutrition and exposure." Grace's voice remained steady, but her eyes glistened. "I remember because I was 18 when I filed that paperwork. I thought it was routine. I did not understand what those words meant, what they would cost. But I remember your names. I remember all of them." Thomas lowered the rifle slightly. "You remember my sister's name?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I thought it was beautiful, Morning Star. I remember thinking that a girl with a name like that deserved better than what my father's paperwork was about to do to her." Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I am not here for revenge." "Then why are you here?" Garrett asked. "Because 6 months ago, the Bureau of Indian Affairs opened an investigation into land fraud on reservation boundaries. They need evidence, documents, testimony. Right now it is word against word. If what you say is true, if you have proof—" "I have 8 years of proof," Grace said. "Every name, every date, every dollar, every tribe displaced, every bribe paid, everything." Thomas looked at her, then at Garrett, then back at Grace. "Where is this journal? Denver, 3 days south, buried with my mother in Blackwood Cemetery. And you can prove your father did this in a court?" "Yes." Thomas nodded slowly. Then he looked at Garrett. "We are not settled, you and I. When this is over, we will talk about what your survey cost my family." "Fair enough," Garrett said. "But for now," Thomas slung the rifle over his shoulder, "for now, we have the same enemy." That afternoon, as they prepared to leave, Garrett noticed something on the horizon. Dust, rising in a thin column against the blue sky, the kind kicked up by horses moving at speed. Thomas saw it, too. "How many?" Garrett asked. Thomas shaded his eyes. 3, maybe 4, coming from the direction of town. Grace went pale. "It is them, already." "Who?" "My father's men. The tall one in black, that is Lucas Merrick, my father's head of security, ex-Pinkerton. He is the one who burned the Gray Wolf cabin." Thomas went very still. Grace continued, "If he is here, it means my father knows I was at that auction. It means he knows I am with you. And it means he will not stop until he has me back, or I am dead." And Garrett looked at the dust cloud, at Thomas, at Grace. "Denver is 3 days south. We will never make it with them this close." Thomas nodded. "There is another way. Old Ute Trail through the Sangre de Cristo Range. 5 days, but they will not follow. Sacred ground. Most whites will not go there." "Will you?" Thomas looked at him. "For justice." "For my sister, I will walk through hell, if necessary." They moved quickly, packing supplies, saddling horses, covering tracks. Grace's hands shook as she tightened her saddle cinch, not with fear, with exhaustion, with the weight of 8 months catching up to her all at once. Garrett saw it, said nothing, but he steadied her horse so she could mount his hand firm on the bridle. Their eyes met, just for a moment. "Why did you buy me?" she asked quietly. "Really?" Garrett was quiet, then honest. "Because when I was 10, I watched a woman get sold and nobody stopped it. I swore if I ever saw it again, I would do something. Today was the first time I kept that promise." Grace looked at him. Something passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two people who had been broken by the same machine, who had learned that the only way forward was to witness each other's pain and refuse to look away. "You are a good man in a bad world, Mr. Stone. I am a man who drew maps that killed people. Good is a stretch." "No," she said softly. "Good is exactly what you are. You just do not know it yet." They rode into the mountains as storm clouds gathered. Thomas led, Grace in the middle, Garrett at the rear, watching the dust rise in the distance. Closer now, always closer. Behind them, 3 riders pushed their horses hard. At the front, Lucas Merrick sat straight in the saddle, his eyes fixed on the mountains ahead. He had his orders: bring Grace Dalton home, or make sure she never spoke again. Either way, Cornelius Dalton would have his silence. The mountain trail narrowed as they climbed. Garrett looked back one last time. The dust cloud had reached the base of the foothills. They had maybe 2 hours, maybe less. Thomas turned in his saddle. "There is no going back now. Once we take this trail, we are committed." Garrett looked at Grace. She sat her horse with her spine straight, her jaw set, her eyes forward. "Then we commit," Garrett said. They rode into the gathering darkness, 3 strangers bound by grief and guilt and the fragile hope that somewhere ahead justice was still possible. Behind them the hunters came. Ahead the mountains waited. And between them a woman who carried the truth in her memory and the weight of it in her hands, riding toward a grave that held the key to everything. The first stars appeared overhead, cold and distant and unchanging. Witnesses to a world that kept turning, whether men were good or evil, whether justice prevailed or crumbled, whether 3 riders made it through the mountains or vanished into them like so many others before. Garrett did not pray. He had given up on God the day he buried his mother. But if he had prayed, it would have been simple. Let us be fast enough. Let us be strong enough. Let us be worth the sacrifice that is coming. Because he knew, with the certainty of a man who had run from consequences for 8 years, that sacrifice was coming. The mountain always demanded payment, and this time Garrett Stone intended to pay his debts in full. The Ute Trail was older than memory. It wound through the Sangre de Cristo Range like a thread pulled through fabric, invisible unless you knew where to look, deadly if you did not. Thomas led them with the confidence of a man walking through his own history, every turn familiar, every landmark a ghost of childhood. The path narrowed as they climbed. Sheer drops opened to the left, granite walls pressed close to the right. The horses picked their way carefully, their hooves finding purchase on stone worn smooth by centuries of passage. Grace rode in the middle, her back straight, despite exhaustion, her hands steady on the reins. Behind her, Garrett kept watch, his rifle across his saddle, his eyes constantly scanning the trail below. They had been riding for 6 hours. The sun had crossed its peak and begun its descent, painting the mountains in shades of copper and gold. Autumn here came early and left late, caught between the memory of summer warmth and the promise of winter's bite. Thomas raised his hand. They stopped. Ahead, the trail opened into a small valley. Not empty. Ruins scattered across the meadow like broken teeth, lodge frames blackened by fire. Children's toys half buried in dirt. A sweat lodge collapsed. A ceremonial circle overgrown with weeds. Thomas dismounted, stood there looking at the ruins with eyes that had learned not to cry, but had never learned to forget. "This was ours," he said quietly, "before the survey, before the papers, before the fire." Grace slid from her horse, walked to stand beside him, not too close, giving him space, but refusing to leave him alone with his ghosts. "How old were you?" she asked. 12 when we left. My sister Aita was 7. She cried for 3 days. Thomas's voice remained steady, but his hands clenched at his sides. She did not understand why we had to go, why the land that had belonged to our family for generations suddenly was not ours anymore. How do you explain theft to a child when the thieves have legal papers? Garrett dismounted as well. The 3 of them stood among the ruins, a strange congregation of broken people in a broken place. What happened? Garrett asked, though he already knew. Had always known in the way a man knows the shape of his sins, even when he refuses to look at them directly. The survey came first, Thomas said. Men with instruments and papers. My father tried to talk to them, showed them the old boundaries, the ones that had stood for 50 years. They smiled and nodded and wrote their numbers anyway. He walked to what had been a lodge foundation, knelt, picked up a child's doll carved from wood, weathered by years of exposure. 3 months later, men from Rocky Mountain Land Trust came with eviction papers, said the survey proved we did not own the water rights. Without water, we could not stay. My father fought, legally. He found a lawyer in Denver who said we had a case. But the judge was paid, Grace said softly. Thomas looked at her. How did you know? Because I filed the payment. $800 to Judge Porter for favorable ruling on land dispute. I was 18. I thought it was a legal fee. I did not know what it really meant. She moved to stand beside Thomas, looking at the doll in his hands. What was her name, your sister? Aida. Morning Star. Thomas's voice cracked just slightly. She loved dolls, carried them everywhere. When we had to leave, she could only take one. She chose this one. Left it behind the day we moved to the reservation, said it should stay home so the land would not be lonely. The silence that followed was heavy, not uncomfortable, just present. The weight of grief acknowledged, held, shared among people who understood that some losses could not be fixed, only witnessed. Garrett found himself speaking, words he had not said aloud in 8 years. I surveyed this land. Stone Valley, I called it. Spring of 1872. I spent 3 days here. Drew the boundaries, marked the water sources, filed my report. He paused, his throat tight. My survey was accurate. I made sure of it. I checked my measurements twice. Verified the creek flow, documented the springs. In my report, I wrote clearly that the Gray Wolf family had full water rights to the creek that ran through the property. Thomas stood, turned to face him. Then how did we lose it? Because I was naive. I thought I was doing honest work for an honest company. I did not know that after I filed my reports, other men would go back and move the boundary markers, change the water source designations, forge my signature on altered documents. Garrett's hands shook. He pressed them flat against his thighs, the same gesture he had seen Grace make. I worked for Rocky Mountain Land Trust for 3 years. I surveyed 42 properties. I thought I was helping settle disputes, clarifying old boundaries, bringing order to chaos. I did not know I was the instrument of theft, the respectable face on systematic robbery. When did you find out? Grace asked. When they used my survey to foreclose on my parents' ranch. Garrett's voice went flat. Stone Valley Ranch, named after my family, not the geography. My father had missed 3 loan payments because his cattle died. Poisoned water, the vet said. Could not explain how. He looked at Thomas. Later I found out Rocky Mountain Land Trust owned the ranch upstream. They had dumped arsenic into the creek during spring runoff, killed 40 head of cattle. My father could not pay the loans. The bank called the note. The foreclosure papers cited a survey that showed discrepancies in the property boundaries. Your own survey, Grace said. Yes, except it was not my survey anymore. They had altered it, changed the numbers. But my signature was there, official, legal. My mother went to the courthouse to fight it. She saw my name on the documents. She died thinking I had betrayed her. Garrett sat down on a fallen log, suddenly unable to stand. I did not find out the truth until after her funeral. I went through my father's papers. Found letters from a lawyer saying the survey had been tampered with. Found copies of my original report. Compared them to the filed versions. They did not match. He looked up at Thomas and Grace. I quit the next day, took my surveying equipment into the mountains and burned it. Every transit, every chain, every notebook. I told myself I was destroying the tools of my trade. Really, I was trying to burn away the guilt. Thomas sat down across from him, the doll still in his hands. Did it work? No. Good, Thomas said. It should not. Guilt is what keeps us human, what separates us from men like Dalton. Grace moved to sit beside Garrett, not touching, but close enough that he could feel her presence. Solid, real, a reminder that he was not alone in the weight he carried. You did not betray your mother, she said quietly. You were used. There is a difference. Does not change what happened. No, but it changes what happens next. She looked at him. The journal I hid, it has the proof. Original survey reports matched against filed versions. Forgers' marks, payment records. Your name will be cleared. I do not want to be cleared. I want her back. I know. Grace's hand moved just slightly toward his, did not quite touch. But we cannot bring back the dead. We can only honor them by finishing what they started. Your mother fought. Do not insult her by giving up now. The three of them sat in the ruins of Thomas's childhood home, surrounded by ghosts and regrets and the fading light of afternoon. Different people, different losses, but bound by the same thread of injustice. Finally, Thomas spoke. The men following us. How close are they? Garrett stood, walked to the edge of the valley, scanned the trail below. In the distance, perhaps a mile back, dust rose. 3 riders pushing hard. Mile, maybe less. They are gaining. They are cutting through, Thomas said, joining him, not following the trail. They must have a tracker who knows this country. Can we go around, avoid them? Thomas shook his head. Not without adding 4 days. And winter is coming. Storms hit this altitude without warning. We get caught in a blizzard, we do. Grace stood. Then we do not avoid them. We set a trap. Both men looked at her. There is a narrow pass ahead, Thomas said slowly. Dead Man's Canyon. Only one way through. We could set an ambush there. No, Garrett said immediately. We do not use Grace as bait. They want me alive, Grace said calmly. Merrick has orders to bring me back. That is our advantage. And if you are wrong, she met his eyes, then you will avenge me. Will you not? Something passed between them, unspoken, profound. Yes, Garrett said. They reached Dead Man's Canyon as the sun touched the western peaks. The passage was exactly as Thomas described. Narrow walls rising 60 feet on either side, barely wide enough for 2 horses abreast. The perfect kill box. Thomas positioned himself on the eastern ridge with his rifle. Garrett created a false camp in the canyon mouth, complete with visible smoke and tethered horses. Grace sat by the fire alone, waiting. The bait. They did not wait long. 3 riders appeared as twilight gathered. They came cautiously, rifles drawn, eyes scanning the rocks. The lead rider was tall, dressed in black, his face weathered by years of violence turned professional. Lucas Merrick. He raised his hand. The riders stopped 50 yards from the camp. Merrick dismounted, walked forward alone, his hands visible, but his gun still holstered. A man confident in his superiority. "Miss Dalton," he called. His voice was cultured, Eastern accent, the kind of voice that belonged in courtrooms, not canyons. "Your father has been very worried." Grace stood, her face calm. "Has he?" "He would like you to come home, voluntarily, before this becomes unpleasant." "Tell him I am already quite unpleasant." Merrick smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "I see the ordeal has not broken your spirit. That is good. Your father values your strength, always has." "My father values control. He mistakes it for love." "Perhaps." Merrick took another step. "But he is still your father, and he is offering you a chance to end this without bloodshed. Come home. Resume your place. All will be forgiven. And if I refuse, then this becomes a legal matter. Kidnapping. Mental incompetence. I have papers signed by Judge Porter declaring you a ward of the state in need of protective custody. I have authority to take you by force if necessary." One of Merrick's men shifted, reaching for Grace. A gunshot cracked. The man's rifle flew from his hands, shattered by Thomas's bullet from the ridge. Standoff. Merrick's smile vanished. His hand moved to his gun. "I would not," Garrett said, stepping from behind a Boulder rifle aimed at Merrick's chest. "Your odds just got considerably worse." Merrick's eyes flicked to Garrett, recognized him. "Garrett Stone, I remember you. Good surveyor. Dalton spoke well of you. Before you became a coward. I became a man with a conscience. Different thing." "Semantics." Merrick's hand remained on his gun. "Here is what is going to happen. You give us the girl. We forget you exist. You go back to your mountain. Everyone lives." "He is lying," Grace said. "Merrick does not leave witnesses." Merrick reached into his coat, slowly, pulled out a folded document, read aloud. "Lucas Merrick, eliminate any parties assisting Grace Dalton in retrieval of sensitive materials. No survivors. Signed, Cornelius Dalton." He looked at Grace. "Your father is protecting his legacy, Miss Dalton. Surely you can understand. Family is everything." Grace's voice shook, not with fear, with fury. Family stopped when he chose money over humanity. Naive girl, money is humanity. It is the only thing that separates us from animals. Your father understands this. Why do you think he succeeded where others failed? Because he had no soul to sell. Merrick laughed. Soul, what a quaint concept. He looked at Garrett and Thomas. Last chance, walk away or die here. His men drew weapons. Chaos erupted. Thomas fired, hitting one man in the shoulder. The man fell screaming. Merrick drew, fired at Garrett, missed. Garrett dove behind cover. The second henchman charged Grace. She grabbed a burning branch from the fire, swung it like a club, connected with his face. He stumbled back, cursing. Merrick tackled Garrett. They went down hard, rolling in the dirt. Merrick was younger, stronger, trained in combat. He landed on top fists, hammering. Grace aimed the rifle Thomas had left for her. Tried to get a clear shot. Could not. They were moving too fast, too entangled. Her hands shook. The rifle felt impossibly heavy. Thomas appeared behind Merrick, rifle barrel pressed to the man's skull. Enough, Merrick froze. Slowly raised his hands. Smart man, Thomas said. Now get off him. Merrick stood. Garrett rolled away, blood streaming from his nose, one eye already swelling. Thomas kept his rifle trained on Merrick. We need him alive, to testify. He will not testify, Grace said. My father owns him, body and soul. Not soul, Merrick said quietly. He took that a long time ago. Something in his voice made them all pause. Not defiance. Something else. Something broken. What do you mean? Garrett asked, wiping blood from his face. Merrick looked at him. For the first time, the professional mask slipped. Underneath was exhaustion. Decades of it. You think I work for Dalton because I want to, because I enjoy burning families out of their homes, killing men who dare to resist. He laughed bitterly. I work for Dalton because 18 years ago I made the mistake of investigating his business practices. I was Pinkerton then. Good detective. Honest. I found evidence of fraud. Prepared a report. What happened? Grace asked. Dalton found out. He could not bribe me. So he destroyed me. Killed my wife. Made it look like an accident. Took my daughter. Told me if I ever spoke against him she would die. Slowly. Painfully. Merrick's eyes were dead. I have been his attack dog ever since, doing terrible things to terrible people and innocent people alike, all to keep my daughter alive. Where is she? Thomas asked. I do not know. I have not seen her in 18 years. Dalton sends me a letter once a year, a photograph of her, proof she is alive. As long as I obey, she stays that way. Grace stared at him. You burned Thomas's family alive for a man holding your daughter hostage. Yes. And you would do it again. Yes. The honesty was somehow worse than a lie. Thomas's finger tightened on the trigger. My sister was 7 years old. I know. Merrick did not look away. I remember all of them. their names, their faces, the smell of burning. I remember everything. It is my punishment. It is not enough punishment. I know that too. Grace stepped forward. Where is my mother? Merrick blinked. What? My mother? Elena Dalton. She supposedly died when I was 12. But I do not think she did. I think my father hid her, like he hid everything else that threatened his control. Something flickered in Merrick's eyes. Recognition. You know, Grace said. You know where she is. Grace, Merrick said slowly, your mother is dead. I am sorry, but she is. You are lying. I wish I was. He looked at her with something like pity. Your father had her committed to St. Magdalen's Asylum in Santa Fe, spring of 1867. She died there 6 months later. I saw the death certificate myself. I was the one who arranged her burial. Grace's world tilted. Your father told you she had scarlet fever. That was a lie. She did not die of disease. She died of a broken heart, of knowing she was trapped and powerless, and that her daughter was being raised by a monster. Tears streamed down Grace's face. Where is she buried? Santa Fe. St. Magdalen's Cemetery. Unmarked grave. Prisoner burial. Your father did not want anyone to find her. But the grave in Denver, Blackwood Cemetery, Elena Dalton, I saw it. I was at the funeral. Merrick shook his head. Empty. Your father staged a funeral for appearances, for society, so people would not ask questions. The coffin was filled with stones. Grace sat down hard. All the air gone from her lungs. The journal, hidden in her mother's grave. The journal that was supposed to save them all. It was buried in the wrong place, in a grave that did not exist. Garrett knelt beside her. Grace, it is gone, she whispered. The journal. I hid it in my mother's coffin, but it was not my mother. It was Stone's. The journal is in Denver, in a fake grave, and my mother is in Santa Fe, in an unmarked hole in the ground. We can still get it, Garrett said. Denver is 4 days. We go, we retrieve it, we... No, Grace looked up. Do you not understand? The coffin in Denver was never opened. My father staged a closed casket funeral. If I buried the journal in that coffin, it is still there. But my father knows. He has always known. He knows exactly where the journal is. Then why has he not retrieved it? Because he cannot, Merrick said quietly. Exhuming a grave requires court order. Even Dalton cannot simply dig up a cemetery plot. It would raise questions, draw attention, the one thing he cannot afford. So the journal is still there, Thomas said, protected by the very laws Dalton uses against others. Yes, but for how long? Merrick met Grace's eyes. Your father is desperate. Desperate men take desperate risks. If he thinks you are heading to Denver, he will find a way to get there first, destroy the evidence before you can retrieve it. Then we do not give him time to get there first, Garrett said. He stood. How many men does Dalton have in Denver? Merrick considered. 4, maybe 5. Lawyers mostly. A judge in his pocket. And how long would it take him to send more from his estate in Colorado Springs 2 days by rail, 3 by horse? Garrett looked at Thomas. Can we reach Denver in 2 days? Not by this trail, but there is another way. Railroad maintenance road through the foothills. Dangerous. Exposed, but fast. How fast? If we do not stop, if the horses hold. 36 hours. Then we ride tonight. Garrett turned to Merrick. We cannot kill you, and we cannot bring you, but we can leave you. Thomas tied Merrick to a pine tree, left him with water and minimal supplies. Someone will find you in 3 days, Thomas said, or a bear will. Either way, you are out of our way. Grace, Merrick called as they prepared to leave. Your mother? She loved you. Her last words were your name. I thought you should know. Grace did not turn around. Could not. If she looked at him, she would break, and she could not afford to break. Not yet. They needed to rest the horses and resupply before the final push to Denver. Thomas led them to a small trading post nestled in the foothills. A weathered sign read, Moss Trading. A woman emerged as they approached, 60 or so, with iron gray hair and eyes that assessed them quickly, categorizing threat level and need in a single glance. "Thomas Greywolf," she said. "Heard you were tracking someone in these mountains." "I was. Found more than I expected." Thomas dismounted. "Ida, this is Garrett Stone and Grace Dalton. We are riding to Denver to expose Cornelius Dalton." Ida's expression hardened at the name. "Dalton, the man who destroyed my husband's freight business." "The same," Grace said, stepping forward. "I am his daughter, and I am the one who will testify against him." Ida studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Anyone fighting that devil is welcome here. Water your horses. I will pack supplies. You have a hard ride ahead." She disappeared into the trading post, returning with jerky hardtack and full canteens. "My husband died thinking he failed," Ida said as she handed the supplies to Grace, "drank himself to death because he believed the lies they told about his business practices. If what you are doing proves those were lies, you will give me something I thought was lost, the truth about what happened to him." "I will prove it," Grace said. "Then ride fast, and do not let them silence you the way they silenced everyone else." They left the trading post as the sun set, supplied, and rested, riding toward Denver and the reckoning that awaited. A rough track carved into the mountainside, barely wide enough for a single horse, with drops that disappeared into darkness on one side and sheer rock on the other. The horses were exhausted. Grace swayed in her saddle, fighting sleep. Only forward momentum kept her upright. As dawn broke, they stopped to rest the horses and eat. Cold jerky and stale biscuits, the food of people too focused on survival to taste what they were eating. Grace sat apart from the others, her back against a boulder, staring at nothing. Garrett approached, sat beside her, said nothing, just sat. After a long silence, Grace spoke. "She died alone, in an asylum, believing her daughter forgot her. You did not forget. I was 12. I believed what my father told me. I mourned at an empty grave. I left flowers on stones while she rotted in an unmarked hole 300 miles away. You were a child. He lied to you. For 16 years I have carried the memory of my mother's funeral, the closed coffin, my father's tears, which I now know were performance, the minister's words about a life well lived, all of it theater, and I never questioned it." She turned to look at Garrett. "I hid the journal in what I thought was my mother's final resting place. I thought I was honoring her, keeping her secrets safe, but she was never there. She was alone in Santa Fe in a pauper's grave with no one to remember her name. You remember her name. I remember a lie. Elena Dalton, devoted wife and mother. But who was she really? Where did she come from? My father said Boston, but he said many things. What if she was like me, trapped, erased?" Garrett was quiet for a moment, then carefully. "Merrick said Santa Fe, St. Magdalene's Asylum. If you want to know the truth about your mother, that is where we start looking. After Denver." "After Denver," he agreed. "First, we get the journal. Then we get answers." Grace leaned her head against his shoulder, just for a moment, just to remember what human warmth felt like. Garrett stiffened, then slowly relaxed. Let her rest. His hand came up, hesitated, then settled gently on her arm. Not possessive, just present. Thomas watched from across the camp, said nothing. Some moments required witness, not interruption. They reached Denver's outskirts as the sun set on the second day. The horses were stumbling, lathered, nearly broken. Another hour and they would have dropped. They found a stable on the edge of town, a man who asked no questions and charged double because of it. Worth every penny. While Thomas arranged accommodations at a boarding house, Garrett went to find his contact, Marshal Henry Davies, if the man was still alive and still wearing a badge. Grace waited in the boarding house, too exhausted to do more than sit by the window and watch the street below. She had not bathed in 4 days, had not slept in 48 hours, but her mind would not stop circling. The journal in the fake grave, her mother in the real one, Merrick's dead eyes and broken confession, Thomas's sister's doll, Garrett's guilt carved so deep it had become part of his bones, all of it connected, all of it bleeding together into one massive tapestry of injustice. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it. Her father stood in the hallway. Cornelius Dalton looked exactly as she remembered. Silver hair perfectly combed, suit impeccably tailored, face calm, benevolent, the very picture of civilized authority. He could have been arriving for tea. "Hello, Graciela," he said. "May I come in?" Grace's hand went to the knife Garrett had given her, hidden in her pocket. "No. I understand. After everything, you have every right to be cautious. But I am here as your father, not as your enemy. You stopped being my father when you had me imprisoned. I had you protected from yourself. You were experiencing delusions, paranoia. The doctor confirmed it. Your doctor, who you paid." Dalton sighed. The patient sigh of a reasonable man dealing with unreasonable circumstances. "I am willing to overlook this unfortunate episode. Come home, right now. We will say you were kidnapped by mountain bandits. A terrible ordeal. But you are safe now. You can resume your life." "What life?" "The one where I watch you destroy families and say nothing, where I am complicit through silence. You would be comfortable, provided for, safe." "I do not want safety purchased with other people's suffering." Dalton's expression hardened, just slightly, the mask slipping. "Then what do you want, Graciela Justice? There is no such thing. There is only power and the illusion of law. I have both. I want you to pay for what you have done. To my mother, to Thomas's family, to Garrett's family, to 47 other families whose names I remember because I filed the paperwork that destroyed them. You were following orders. You are blameless. No, I am complicit, and I am ending my complicity now." Dalton studied her. "You are going to Blackwood Cemetery, for the journal in your mother's grave." Grace's blood went cold. He knew, of course he knew. "I have men watching the cemetery," Dalton continued. "I have Judge Porter ready to sign commitment papers the moment you set foot on that property. I have doctors prepared to declare you mentally unsound. I have everything, Graciela, except the journal. The journal means nothing without you alive to authenticate it. A dead woman's written ravings, easily dismissed. Then you will have to kill me." "No," Dalton's voice went soft, dangerous. "I will kill Garrett Stone. I will kill Thomas Graywolf. I will kill anyone who helps you. But you, I will keep alive. In an asylum for the rest of your natural life, medicated into oblivion." "A cautionary tale about disobedient daughters." He stepped closer. "Or you can come home. Choose life. Choose comfort. Choose family." Grace looked at him, really looked. At the man who had taught her to read, who had held her hand at her mother's fake funeral, who had destroyed lives with the stroke of a pen and slept soundly afterward. "You are not my family," she said. "You are a cancer that grew where a father should have been." Dalton's face went cold. "Then I will see you at the cemetery, and we will see which of us the law believes." He turned and walked away, unhurried, confident. Grace closed the door, locked it, pressed her back against it and slid to the floor. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, with rage. Garrett and Thomas returned an hour later, found her still sitting on the floor. "He was here," she said. "My father. He knows about the cemetery. He is waiting for us." "Then we do not go to the cemetery," Garrett said. "The journal is there. We will find another way." "There is no other way," Grace stood. "But he made a mistake. He threatened you, both of you, and I will not let him destroy anyone else I care about." The words hung in the air. "Anyone else I care about." Garrett met her eyes. Something passed between them. Acknowledgement, promise. "Then we need a plan," Thomas said. "A real one, not a trap, not luck. Strategy." They spread out a map of Denver on the table, marked the cemetery location, discussed approaches, exits, contingencies. Marshal Davies joined them, an older man, weathered but honest-eyed, who listened to their story and nodded slowly. "I have been collecting testimony against Dalton for 6 months," he said. "Quietly, families he displaced, bribes he paid. But without hard evidence, it is all hearsay. This journal, if it exists, changes everything. It exists, Grace said, and tomorrow we are going to get it. Outside, night fell over Denver. In the wealthy district, Cornelius Dalton sat in his hotel suite writing orders to his men. In a boarding house, 3 people planned an impossible theft. In Blackwood Cemetery, an empty coffin waited, holding the only weapon that could bring down an empire. And on the outskirts of town, a wanted poster was nailed to a tree, fresh, still wet with ink. Grace Dalton, $5,000, wanted for theft, document destruction, mental incompetence. Beneath it, scrawled in handwriting, Grace recognized a message. Come home, Gracie. Last chance. Everyone you care about dies otherwise. Tick-tock. Thomas found it at dawn, brought it back to show the others. They were out of time. The reckoning was coming. And tomorrow, one way or another, everything would end. Dawn came cold to Denver, the kind of cold that settled in bones and refused to leave a warning of winter's approach. Garrett stood at the window of the boarding house, watching the street below filled with early morning traffic, wagons hauling goods to market, merchants opening shops, the ordinary machinery of a city waking to another day of commerce and survival. Somewhere out there, Cornelius Dalton was waiting, and somewhere in Blackwood Cemetery a grave held the truth that could destroy him. Marshal Henry Davies arrived as the sun cleared the eastern mountains. He was older than Garrett remembered, his face mapped with lines that spoke of hard years and harder choices. But his eyes were clear, his handshake firm, his badge worn with the weight of a man who still believed it meant something. Garrett Stone, Davies said, settling into a chair. When I heard you were alive, I thought it was rumor. The mountains have a way of keeping secrets. Some secrets are worth keeping, Garrett Bow replied, and some are worth exposing. Davies pulled out a leather folder thick with documents. I have been investigating Dalton for 6 months, quietly, carefully. He has eyes everywhere, but even he cannot watch everyone. What have you found? Testimony from 19 families, all following the same pattern: disputed surveys, foreclosed loans, judges who ruled in Dalton's favor despite evidence. But it is all circumstantial, word against word. Without physical proof, Dalton's lawyers will tear it apart. Grace entered from the adjoining room. She had washed, changed into a simple dress borrowed from the landlady, but exhaustion still shadowed her eyes. Sleep had been impossible. Too many ghosts crowded the darkness. The journal has the proof, she said. 8 years of transactions, names, dates, amounts. My father kept meticulous records. He believed his power made him untouchable, so he saw no need to hide his crimes. Davies studied her. Miss Dalton, I knew your mother, briefly. She came to my office once years ago, asked about water rights property law. I remember thinking she seemed afraid of something, or someone. Grace's breath caught. When was this? Spring of 1867. A few months before she died, or before your father said she died. What did she ask you? Whether a wife had legal standing to contest her husband's business practices, whether testimony from a spouse could be used in court. Davies paused. I told her the truth, that wives had almost no legal rights, that her testimony would not be admissible without corroborating evidence. What did she do? She thanked me, left. I never saw her again. Davies leaned forward. But I have thought about that conversation for 16 years, about the fear in her eyes, about what she might have known. Grace sat down heavily. She knew everything, and she knew there was no legal way to stop him. So she started keeping records, writing everything down, creating the evidence she needed. The journal, Garrett said. Yes, my mother started it. I continued it after she died, or after I thought she died. Grace's hands clenched. She was building a case against him. And when he discovered it, he had her committed, erased her, just like he tried to erase me. Thomas entered, shaking rain from his coat. He had been scouting the cemetery since before dawn. 2 men watching the main entrance, he reported. 1 more near the Dalton family plot. They are not hiding. Dalton wants us to know he is ready. Can we approach unseen? Garrett asked. There is a maintenance gate on the east side, locked, but I can pick it. From there it is 50 yards to the plot, open ground, no cover." "A killing field," Davies said. "Yes." They stood in silence, contemplating the impossibility of their task. 3 people against Dalton's resources, his men, his money, his control of every legal lever that mattered. "There is another way," Grace said slowly. "We do not sneak in. We walk through the front gate. Legal, public, with federal authority." Davies raised an eyebrow. "Exhuming a grave requires a court order. Then we get one." Grace turned to him. "You said there is a federal land commissioner in town, James Harrow, investigating fraud on reservation boundaries." "He is here, yes, but he has no jurisdiction over cemetery matters." "He does if the grave contains evidence in a federal fraud investigation." Grace's mind was working now, putting pieces together. "My father committed fraud against the federal government, falsified survey documents that were filed with federal land offices. That is a federal crime. But we need the journal to prove it, which is why Commissioner Harrow issues an emergency order to preserve evidence. The journal is evidence in a federal investigation. Destroying it would be obstruction of justice. He can order the grave open, the contents secured, all before my father can stop it." Davies considered this. It could work, but Harrow would need reasonable cause to believe the evidence exists and is at risk. "I will give him reasonable cause," Grace said. "I will testify to what I know, what I saw, what I recorded, and you can corroborate with your witness statements." "When?" "Now, this morning, before my father realizes what we are doing." Garrett looked at her, saw the determination in her eyes, the steel in her spine. She had been beaten down, erased, sold, dismissed, and she was still fighting, still refusing to be silent. "Then we move fast," he said. Federal Land Commissioner James Harrow maintained offices in a building near the courthouse. A bureaucrat by title but a crusader by temperament, he had spent 3 months in Denver, untangling the web of fraud that connected mining claims, railroad rights, and reservation boundaries. When Grace walked into his office, he looked up from a desk buried in maps and surveys. "I am Grace Dalton," she said without preamble. "Cornelius Dalton is my father, and I have evidence that will expose 8 years of systematic federal land fraud, but the evidence is in danger of being destroyed within the next few hours. I need your help." Harrow set down his pen. "Sit down, Miss Dalton. Start from the beginning." She did. For 90 minutes, Grace laid out everything: the journal, her mother's death, the forged surveys, the bribes, the displaced families. 47 cases, each detailed from memory, each corroborated by the testimony Davies had collected. When she finished, Harrow sat back in his chair. "This is the most comprehensive fraud scheme I have encountered in 20 years of federal service," he said. "If what you are saying is true, it implicates not just your father, but judges, surveyors, land office clerks, the entire system." "It is true, and I can prove it, but only if we secure the journal before my father destroys it." Harrow picked up his pen, began writing. "I am issuing an emergency preservation order. The grave of Elena Dalton in Blackwood Cemetery is hereby secured as evidence in a federal fraud investigation. Local law enforcement is ordered to protect the site and facilitate exhumation under federal supervision." He signed the document, affixed his seal. "Marshal Davies will execute this order immediately. Miss Dalton, you will accompany him as identifying witness. Mr. Stone and Mr. Graywolf will serve as additional witnesses and protection." Grace took the document with shaking hands. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet. If this journal does not exist, or if it does not contain what you claim, you will face charges for making false statements to a federal officer, and your father will have every legal right to have you committed." "I understand." "And if it does exist," Harrow continued, "your father will use every resource at his disposal to destroy it and everyone who has seen it. You are putting yourselves at considerable risk." Grace met his eyes. "We have been at risk since the moment we stood against him. At least now we have the law on our side. Let us hope the law is enough." Blackwood Cemetery sprawled across 10 acres on Denver's east side. Ornate headstones marked the plots of the wealthy. Simple crosses indicated those with less to spend on remembrance. And somewhere in between, in a plot purchased 16 years ago, an empty coffin waited. They arrived at noon. Davies led federal order in hand. Garrett and Thomas flanked Grace. Behind them, Harrow had sent 2 federal deputies armed and stone-faced. Dalton's men were waiting at the gate, 3 of them. They moved to block the entrance. "This is private property," one said. "You need permission to enter." Davies held up the order. "Federal authority supersedes private property rights in matters of criminal investigation. Step aside." The man did not move. "I have orders from Mr. Dalton to prevent any unauthorized entry." "Then Mr. Dalton is in violation of a federal court order. You can step aside voluntarily or be arrested for obstruction. Your choice." The men exchanged glances, weighed their loyalty against the prospect of federal prison, stepped aside. They walked through rows of headstones, past monuments to forgotten merchants and miners, past mausoleums built to house the bones of families whose names no longer mattered to anyone living. The Dalton family plot was in the northwest corner. Expensive granite, ornate iron fencing, 3 headstones. Robert Dalton, Cornelius's father. Margaret Dalton, his mother. And Elena Dalton, beloved wife and mother, 1832 to 1867. Grace stood before her mother's stone. 16 years since she had last been here. 16 years of leaving flowers on an empty grave. "This is it," she said quietly. Thomas and Garrett had brought shovels. They began to dig, while Davies and the deputies formed a perimeter. Grace stood watching, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The soil was soft. Recent rain had loosened it. Within 30 minutes, the shovels struck wood. A coffin. Expensive mahogany. Brass fittings tarnished but intact. They cleared the earth away, rigged ropes, lifted it from the ground with careful reverence, set it on the grass beside the open grave. Grace knelt beside it, her hands trembling as they touched the wood. "This is where I put it," she said. "The night before the funeral, I snuck into the funeral home, opened the coffin, hid the journal in the lining over where a heart would be. I thought I was hiding it with my mother, keeping her secret safe even in death." "But she was never here," Garrett said gently. "No, she was in Santa Fe. Alone. Forgotten." Grace's voice broke. "I have been mourning at the wrong grave for 16 years. Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder. Solid. Present. A reminder that she was not alone now. "Open it," Grace said. "Please." Garrett took a crowbar, pried at the coffin lid. The old nails resisted, then gave with a shriek of protesting metal. The lid lifted. Inside, as Merrick had said, there were no bones, only stones. River rock smooth and round, arranged in a vaguely human shape. A macabre sculpture. A father's lie made physical. But there, tucked into the silk lining above where a heart would rest, a leather-wrapped package. Grace reached in with shaking hands, lifted it. The leather was dry, cracked with age, but intact. She unwrapped it carefully. A journal, leather-bound, pages yellowed but legible. Her mother's handwriting on the first page. "For my daughter Grace, may you have the courage I lacked. May you finish what I could only begin. With love, eternal Elena." Grace pressed the journal to her chest, tears streaming down her face, not tears of sadness, of vindication, of connection across death and distance, and 16 years of lies. "Grace!" The voice cut through the moment like a knife. She turned. Her father stood 10 feet away, flanked by 4 men. His face was calm, benevolent. The same face he had worn at her mother's false funeral. "This has gone far enough," Cornelius Dalton said. "You are disturbed, traumatized, not responsible for your actions. Come with me now, and we can resolve this quietly. Medical care, rest. No charges filed against your accomplices." Grace stood, the journal clutched in her hands. "No. Grace, be reasonable. You cannot win this. I have lawyers. I have judges. That journal, whatever it contains, will be deemed inadmissible, the ravings of a disturbed woman and her equally disturbed daughter. Then why are you here? Grace asked. If it means nothing, why come yourself? Why not send your men? Dalton's mask slipped, just for a moment. Underneath was something cold, calculating. Because you are my daughter, and despite everything, I am trying to save you from yourself. You are trying to save yourself from justice. Justice. Dalton smiled. There is no justice. There is only power and the illusion of law. I have spent 30 years building an empire. You think one journal will destroy it? Grace opened the journal, read aloud. April 1866. Cornelius has paid Judge Porter $800 to rule against the Gray Wolf family water rights claim. I copied the receipt. It is hidden in this journal. She turned pages. September 1872. Cornelius ordered his foreman to move boundary markers on the Stone property after federal survey was completed. Surveyor Garrett Stone's original report was accurate. Cornelius altered it after filing. I have the original in this journal. More pages. January 1873. Cornelius has had me committed to St. Magdalene's Asylum in Santa Fe. He told our daughter I died of scarlet fever. This is a lie. I am writing this in secret. If anyone finds this, please tell Grace that her mother loved her, that I fought for as long as I could, that I am sorry I was not strong enough to stop him. Grace's voice broke on the last words. That is my mother's handwriting. Her words, dated 4 months after you told me she died. Dalton's face had gone pale. You cannot prove that journal is authentic. It could be forged, created recently to manufacture evidence. I can prove it, Grace said, because I do not have just one copy. I have 3. Dalton froze. What? Did you think I would hide the only evidence in one grave? I am my father's daughter. I plan for contingencies. Grace looked at Davies. Marshall Davies has had a copy for the past 6 months, authenticated by handwriting experts, verified against Federal Land Office records. Davies pulled a matching journal from his coat, held it up. Commissioner Harrow has the second copy, Grace continued, hand-delivered to him this morning, along with testimony from 47 families corroborating the contents. Dalton's men shifted uneasily. This was not part of their orders. This was not supposed to happen. And this, Grace held up the journal from the coffin, is the original, written in my mother's hand and mine, documenting every crime you committed from 1866 to 1874, every bribe, every fraud, every family you destroyed. She stepped closer to her father. You taught me to be thorough. You taught me to plan. You taught me that power comes from controlling information. Her voice hardened. I learned my lessons well. Dalton stared at her. For the first time in her life, Grace saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Fear. You have destroyed your own father, he said quietly. No, you destroyed yourself. I am just making sure everyone sees the ruins. Davies moved forward. Cornelius Dalton, you are under arrest for fraud against the federal government, bribery of federal officials, conspiracy to defraud, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. Dalton's men did not move, did not fight. They had been hired for intimidation, not for dying in a cemetery for a lost cause. As Davies placed handcuffs on her father, Grace watched, feeling nothing, or perhaps feeling too much to name. Grief and vindication and exhaustion and relief all tangled together into something that sat in her chest like a stone. Her father looked at her one last time. You will regret this. You have no family now, no name, no place in the world. Grace met his eyes. I have something better. I have the truth. And I have people who see me as I am, not as you wanted me to be. She looked at Garrett, at Thomas, at Davies. That is enough. The federal courthouse 3 weeks later was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls, reporters from newspapers as far away as San Francisco, families who had lost land, lawyers who had fought Dalton and lost, witnesses to the unraveling of an empire. Grace sat at the witness table, The journal opened before her, Commissioner Harrow presiding, a stenographer recording every word. She had been testifying for 4 hours. Her voice was hoarse but steady. She did not need notes. She had lived these numbers, these names, these crimes for 8 years. Case 43, she said. The Morrison Ranch, Township 7, Range 12. Original survey by William Foster showed clear title. Your father paid Foster's supervisor $200 to alter the filing, changing the property boundaries to create a title dispute. The Morrisons lost their ranch in the subsequent legal battle. Harrow made notes. Continue. Case 44, the Chen family, Chinese immigrants who had purchased land legally in 1869. Your father used the foreign miners' tax as pretext to challenge their ownership despite the tax being repealed. Paid Judge Porter $600 for favorable ruling. Chen family lost their land and were forcibly removed. On it went, case after case, each one a family, each one a life altered or destroyed, each one documented in her mother's careful handwriting and her own. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Harrow spoke. Miss Dalton, this court has reviewed the evidence you have provided, the journals authenticated by multiple experts, the testimony of 47 families, the corroborating documents from federal land offices, the confession of Lucas Merrick, your father's former head of security. He paused. The evidence is overwhelming. Cornelius Dalton, you are found guilty of 63 counts of fraud against the federal government, 41 counts of bribery, 28 counts of conspiracy, and 17 counts of obstruction of justice. You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. All assets will be seized and used to establish a restitution fund for defrauded families. The courtroom erupted, cheering, crying. The sound of people who had waited years for validation, for justice, for acknowledgement that what had been done to them was wrong. Dalton sat impassive. Then he looked at Grace. You destroyed your own father. Grace stood, walked to where he sat in chains. No, you destroyed yourself when you chose greed over humanity. When you erased my mother and tried to erase me, I just stopped letting you erase everyone else. You will regret this. I already do. I regret that I did not find the courage sooner, that 47 families suffered while I stayed silent. But I am done regretting inaction. I will regret what I did not, what you forced me to become. Guards led Dalton away. He did not look back. Grace sat down, the weight of 8 years sliding from her shoulders. She felt lighter, emptier, free. Garrett was beside her in an instant. Thomas on her other side, silent witnesses to her liberation. 3 days of waiting. The journal was secured, federal evidence, under armed guard in Commissioner Harrow's office, but they could not move forward without corroborating testimony. Grace's word and her mother's journal were powerful, but Dalton's lawyers would attack both. The journal could be forged. Grace could be deemed unreliable due to her history of institutionalization. They needed a witness from inside Dalton's operation, someone who had participated in the crimes and was willing to confess. On the 3rd day, Marshal Davies received a telegram from a sheriff in the Mountain Territories. A man had been found dehydrated and delirious, tied to a tree in the high country. He was asking for federal protection and claimed to have information about Cornelius Dalton. Lucas Merrick. Davies rode out personally, brought him back in chains more for protection than restraint. Merrick had been tied to that tree for 5 days. Another day, and he would have died. In the holding cell, Merrick looked at Davies with eyes that had seen too much and felt too little. I want immunity, Merrick said. His voice was hoarse from dehydration. Full federal immunity and witness protection for my daughter. Where is your daughter? I do not know exactly, but Dalton does. That is the deal. I testify against him, give you everything, and you find her and keep her safe. Davies sat across from him. What can you give us? Merrick reached into his boot, pulled out a folded paper wrapped in oilcloth. Somehow it had survived 5 days exposed to elements. 18 years of insurance, he said. I knew Dalton would eventually decide I was more liability than asset, so I kept records. Names, dates, crimes, not everything, but enough. He unfolded the paper. It was covered in cramped handwriting. Dates, locations, victims. The Gray Wolf fire. I set it, under Dalton's direct orders. Here is the date, the payment, the method. The Morrison Ranch eviction. I forged the surveyor's addendum. Here is how. The Chen family removal. I bribed the sheriff. Here is the amount. Davies read. His hands shook. Why? He asked. Why do all this if you were keeping records to use against him? Because he has my daughter. Has. I do not even know anymore. Merrick's mask cracked. 18 years ago, I investigated Dalton. I was Pinkerton. Good detective. I found evidence. He could not bribe me, so he took everything else. Killed my wife, made it look like an accident, took my daughter, 8 years old, told me if I ever spoke against him, she would die. And you believed him? He sent me a photograph every year, proof of life. As long as I obeyed, she stayed alive. So I obeyed. I became his weapon, his monster. Merrick looked at his hands. I burned the Gray Wolf cabin. I heard the screaming. I smelled the smoke. I did it anyway because somewhere my daughter was alive because I did terrible things. And now I am tired of being his creature, tired of remembering the faces. If there is any chance my daughter is still alive, still safe, I will give you Dalton. All of him. Every crime, every victim, every lie. But you have to promise me she will be protected. Davies stood. I will bring this to Commissioner Harrow. If your information checks out, if your daughter can be located and protected, we have a deal. She was last held at St. Catherine's boarding school in St. Louis. That was 5 years ago, the last photograph I received. We will find her. Merrick nodded. Then quietly, the girl, Grace Dalton, is she safe? She is. Good. She deserves better than what her father gave her, better than what I helped him do. 2 weeks later, federal agents located a young woman in St. Louis, 23 years old, school teacher. Her name was Elizabeth Merrick. She had been told her father died 18 years ago, had been raised in boarding schools funded by an anonymous benefactor. When told the truth, she wept, not for herself, for the families her father had destroyed while trying to keep her alive. But she agreed to the protection, agreed to let him testify, because some truths, no matter how painful, needed to be spoken. Outside the courthouse, families gathered. They did not know what to say to her. She was Dalton's daughter, his blood. But she was also their champion, the one who had given them back their names. An old woman approached, weathered face, hands gnarled with work. My husband lost his ranch in 1871, she said. Died thinking he had failed. Drank himself into an early grave because he believed the lies they told about disputed boundaries. She took Grace's hand. You gave me something I thought I had lost, the truth about what happened, the proof that he did not fail, that he was robbed. Thank you. Grace could not speak, could only nod. More people came, one by one, each with a story, each with gratitude that felt too heavy to accept but too precious to refuse. When the crowd finally dispersed, Grace found herself alone with Garrett and Thomas. What now? Thomas asked. Grace looked at the courthouse, at the city beyond, at the mountains in the distance. Now I find my mother, her real grave, in Santa Fe, and I tell her what we did, what she started, and I finished. We will come with you, Garrett said. You do not have to. We know. He held her gaze. We want to. 3 months later, they stood in a small cemetery on the outskirts of Santa Fe, St. Magdalene's, where women who had been deemed inconvenient were buried in unmarked graves. It had taken weeks to find the right spot. Asylum records were incomplete. Graves were numbered, not named, but Grace had her mother's death date from Merrick, and eventually a sympathetic nun had helped them locate the plot. They erected a headstone, simple granite, but with the truth carved in stone. Elena, Many Mountains Dalton, 1832 to 1867. My mother, truth keeper. She died fighting for justice. Her daughter finished the fight. Grace knelt beside the grave, placed her hand on the earth. I am sorry I took so long, Mother. I am sorry you died alone. But your words, your courage, your journal saved hundreds of families. You did not die for nothing. She stayed there for a long time. Garrett and Thomas gave her space, but remained close. When she finally stood, her eyes were red but clear. Thank you, she said, for waiting. Always, Garrett replied. They returned to Colorado as spring arrived. The land was greening. Snowmelt filled the streams, the world renewing itself the way it did every year, indifferent to human drama. Stone Valley Ranch was as Garrett had left it 4 years ago, weathered, neglected, but the bones were good. The land was his again, legally restored by federal order. He stood in the yard looking at the work ahead, rebuilding the barn, repairing fences, planting crops. The labor of years compressed into a single overwhelming moment. Grace appeared beside him. She had been staying in town working for the federal land office as a document clerk, helping other families navigate the restoration process. But she visited the ranch every week, sometimes to help with paperwork, sometimes just to sit on the porch and watch the sunset. Today she came with a question. Do you ever think about the auction? She asked. What would have happened if you had not spoken up every day? I was ready to give up, to believe them when they said I was worthless. Garrett turned to face her. You were never worthless. You were surrounded by people too blind to see your value. Grace stepped closer. And now I see it, every day. The space between them was small, had been shrinking for months, since the cemetery, since the trial, since 100 small moments of understanding and shared silence. Garrett, Grace said quietly, I am not asking for promises. I am not asking for certainty. I am just asking if there is room in your rebuilding for one more. He looked at her, at the woman who had survived the unsurvivable, who had fought an empire with nothing but truth and courage, who looked at his broken ranch and saw possibility instead of ruin. There is room, he said. There has always been room. I was just afraid to offer it. And now I am more afraid of not offering it. Grace took his hand, calloused palm against calloused palm. Two people who had learned that survival was not the same as living, and that sometimes the bravest thing was to stop running and start building. Then I accept, she said. They stood in the yard of Stone Valley Ranch, the mountains rising behind them, the future uncertain but no longer terrifying. Thomas visited monthly. He was rebuilding his family's homestead with help from tribal elders and young people who were learning what it meant to have land that was legally theirs. He brought news from the reservation, stories of families returning to ancestral lands, children learning old ways in new circumstances. 1 year later, Garrett and Grace were married in a simple ceremony. Marshall Davies officiated. Thomas stood witness. A dozen families they had helped attended. No grand celebration, just people who understood that some beginnings came after endings, and that was fine. 2 years later, their first child was born, a daughter. They named her Elena. 3 years later, the ranch was thriving. Not wealthy, but sustainable. Honest work producing honest results. Grace continued working for the Federal Land Office. She became the leading expert on land fraud restoration in the territory. Families traveled hundreds of miles to consult with her, to have someone who understood not just the law, but the human cost of its perversion. Thomas became the first Native American federal land advocate in Colorado, working to ensure that treaties were honored, that boundaries were respected, that the mistakes of the past were not repeated. And Garrett never surveyed again. But he taught others how to do it honestly, how to measure land without stealing it, how to draw boundaries that protected rather than displaced. On quiet evenings, Grace would sit on the porch of Stone Valley Ranch and write. Not legal documents, not testimony, just letters to her mother, telling her about Elena's first steps, about the garden they planted, about the slow, steady work of building a life on foundations of truth rather than lies. She never mailed the letters, just kept them in a box. A record for her daughter, proof that even the dead could guide the living if you listened to their words and honored their courage. 5 years after the trial, Grace received a letter. It came from a woman in Santa Fe, a former nun at St. Magdalene's Asylum. The letter was brief, but it changed everything. Dear Miss Dalton, I was present when your mother died. She asked me to give you something when you were old enough to understand. I have waited 16 years for the right moment. I believe that moment is now. Enclosed was a locket, gold, simple. Inside a photograph of Elena holding a baby. Grace recognized her mother's face. The baby was herself. On the back of the photograph, written in her mother's hand, "To my daughter, you are braver than you know, stronger than you believe, and loved more than words can express. Finish what I started. Love, Mother." Grace sat on the porch holding the locket, tears streaming down her face, not tears of grief, of completion, of a circle finally closed. Garrett found her there at sunset, said nothing, just sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, holding her while she cried. She knew, Grace whispered. She knew I would finish it. She knew you were her daughter, Garrett said. That was enough. The sun set over the mountains. The ranch settled into evening quiet. Inside, their daughter slept. Around them, land that had been stolen and restored, lives that had been broken and rebuilt. Not perfect, never perfect, but honest, true, worth the cost. Grace looked at the photograph one more time, her mother's eyes, strong, determined, unbroken despite everything. I did it, Mother, she said to the image. I finished it. You can rest now. In a federal holding facility 300 miles away, Lucas Merrick sat in a cell waiting for his final sentencing. His testimony had secured Dalton's conviction. Without it, the defense might have created reasonable doubt about the journal's authenticity. He had been promised leniency, 20 years instead of life, a chance to die outside prison walls if he survived long enough. A guard appeared. You have a visitor? Merrick looked up. Visitors were rare. Marshal Davies had come once to thank him. Grace had come once to tell him she forgave him, though he had not asked for forgiveness and did not believe he deserved it. The visitor was a young woman, 23, dark hair, her mother's eyes. Elizabeth. Merrick stood slowly. His hand shook. Hello, Father, she said. They sat on opposite sides of the visiting room barrier. She placed her hand against the glass. He placed his against hers, separated by inches and 18 years and crimes that could not be undone. They told me everything, Elizabeth said. What he did to you, to Mother, what you did to protect me. I am not asking for forgiveness. I know I am not offering it, not yet, maybe not ever. She met his eyes. But I am here. I wanted you to know that I survived, that I am safe, that what you did, terrible as it was, kept me alive long enough to become someone who might make it mean something. Merrick's throat closed. You are a teacher. Yes, I teach children to read, to write, to think for themselves, to question authority. A ghost of a smile. I like to think I am undoing some of what Dalton built, one child at a time. Your mother would be proud. She would be horrified by what happened. But yes, she would be proud of who I became despite it. They sat in silence for a long moment. I will write to you, Elizabeth said finally. Not often, but sometimes. So you know I am still out here, still safe, still trying to be worth the cost. You are worth more than the cost. You always were. She stood to leave, paused. The families you hurt. I have been reaching out to them, telling them I am sorry, offering what help I can. Most do not want to see me. Some do. It is slow work. It is good work. It is necessary work. She looked at him one last time. Goodbye, Father. I will write at Christmas. Goodbye, Elizabeth. She left. He sat in the empty visiting room for a long time after his hand still pressed against the glass where hers had been. Redemption was not erasure. It was not forgiveness. It was simply the slow, painful work of acknowledging harm and trying inadequately to make the world slightly less broken than you found it. Lucas Merrick would die in prison, but his daughter would live free, and that he told himself was the only thing that had ever truly mattered. The stars emerged, one by one, cold and distant and unchanging, witnesses to a world where justice was possible, where truth could prevail, where a woman deemed worthless could change the course of history with nothing but courage and a journal full of carefully recorded crimes. Somewhere in federal prison, Cornelius Dalton sat in a cell, diminished, forgotten, his empire scattered, his name synonymous with fraud. Somewhere in unmarked graves and restored homesteads, the families he had destroyed were finally at peace, their names remembered, their struggles acknowledged, their losses validated. And on Stone Valley Ranch, 3 generations of truth-tellers lived. Elena's courage, Grace's determination, young Elena's inheritance of both. The mountain wind carried the scent of growing things, of earth turned and planted, of fences mended and promises kept. Grace Dalton Stone sat with her husband on the porch of their honest home on their honest land and watched the stars appear. She had been thrown in free with 2 horses, deemed worthless by men who measured value in dollars and compliance. She had proven them wrong in the most comprehensive way possible, not by becoming what they valued, but by changing the definition of value itself. Truth over profit, justice over expedience, courage over comfort. That was worth something, worth everything. The mountains stood witness, the stars approved. And in a grave in Santa Fe, a mother's spirit finally rested, knowing her daughter had finished the fight.